It's Thursday, May 29th, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Granthermes. Today on the show, the kids aren't all right. In his crusade against higher education, Donald Trump is targeting foreign students at Harvard specifically. And while that's been happening for a while now, this week, the administration ramped up attacks on not just Harvard, but all foreign students in the country. And it's important to know how we got here, why it's happening, and what we lose by losing these students. But first, make sure you're following or subscribed to Make It Make Sense on whatever podcast app you're listening to this on. If you're on YouTube, like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any new episodes. And subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack. It is just $5 a month for paid subscribers, and you get access to all sorts of great new articles, including the one out just yesterday about the 10 most important things you need to know from J.D. Vance's big interview with the New York Times. All right, let's get to today's episode. Since taking office, Trump has been aggressively targeting Ivy League schools, particularly Harvard and Columbia. Now, he's targeting them under the guise of accusing these schools of harboring and at times encouraging anti-Semitism because they allowed pro-Palestinian protests on their campuses last summer. And before I go any further, I have to say here, there were a lot of ugly and hateful things that happened in those protests. I am in no way condoning those things. I was on the ground on Harvard's campus for those protests. I saw the signs, I heard the chants, I talked to students who felt isolated and attacked by these things, and I do not want to minimize any of those things in any way with the next things I'm going to say in this episode. Now, going back to the campaign, Trump announced he wanted to deport students who supported Palestinians or the plight of people in Gaza, accusing them of being pro-Hamas, the terror group behind the October 7th, 2023 massacre of 1,200 people, which was the deadliest attack against Jewish people since the Holocaust. That attack did spark a war that's now led to the deaths of at least 64,000 Palestinians, with some estimates going as high as 80,000, and another 1,800 Israelis. And as a part of his campaign promises, Trump also wanted to put in place ideological screenings for all foreign students to make sure they didn't support Hamas or appear to be pro-Hamas, which in his eyes was pro-Palestinian. And to be clear, these kinds of things were already in place. There was already a rigorous process to make sure that people with ties to terror groups don't get these visas. But that's not what Trump is talking about, because what he's doing is targeting beliefs for their own sake, targeting speech for its own sake, which pretty much any independent legal expert will tell you violates the First Amendment. But as people began to push back against some of this because of those First Amendment violation concerns, the White House started shifting, started moving its goalpost to also not just target Harvard for what it said it was doing originally and because of last summer, but also targeting the university for its use of diversity, equity, and inclusivity, or DEI policies. And the administration, on top of that, demanded that Harvard send all of its records that it had on foreign students currently at Harvard to the administration, which the university maintains it did to the best of its ability while also keeping students safe. The Department of Homeland Security said that wasn't enough, and then in a letter revoked Harvard's ability to have foreign students on campus, saying that students who were there with visas, quote, must transfer to another university in order to maintain their non-immigrant status. Now, you can disagree with Harvard and its policies, but it is an enormous task for foreign students to have to transfer because the system is already extremely complicated, but it also has to be incredibly scary and frightening for these students right now who just wanted to go to school. And it's important to say, too, that a judge has blocked the White House from forcing these students to leave for the time being. But that's not where the White House stopped. The Trump administration announced that it would be suspending $2 billion in federal research grants to Harvard, with another letter this past Tuesday directing agencies to end $100 million in contracts with the university, effectively cutting ties with one of the country's most prestigious research colleges. A list put out by the New York Times found that Harvard stands to lose about $9 billion in funding, but it's not just Harvard. Like I said, the White House has been targeting a lot of other schools. The Times found at least 18 other colleges and universities being targeted by the administration for cuts to grant money, with the cuts from just 7 of those universities, including the Trump family alma mater of UPenn, totaling more than $3 billion, not including Harvard. And then Trump said he might pull as much as $5 billion from Harvard to send to trade schools instead. Here's how he said it in a press conference yesterday.
Everyone's coming up to me saying, we love the idea of trade schools. With that kind of money, and money from others, but money from them, you can have the best trade schools anywhere in the world. You give them to Iowa, Indiana, lots of good states, well-run states, and you give them the money. They can only be used for trade schools, and they'll teach people how to build motors and cars and AI. You know, the AI, we're building plants, we're building hundreds of billions of dollars worth of AI plants, already started, many of them. We've never had a boom like we're having now. You're going to see it.
So at the risk of getting too far away from talking about foreign students, what Trump said here, this just isn't how any of this works. Yes, Harvard's endowment is enormous. According to its own website, the school's endowment is $53.2 billion. $749 million of that, the school says, goes to student aid and scholarships, but the university also says the majority of that money, about 70% of it, is donor-directed to a specific research project or a specific department, meaning Harvard can't just transfer this endowment money from one place to another without risking losing further donations from the person who gave that money. Also, the money that's given out in grants to schools like Harvard are, one, for the purpose they're being used for. A lot of that money is often already been designated by Congress, in a lot of cases, for that specific research. And two, it's pretty clear that Trump doesn't know that or doesn't care about it, but he seems to think that this endowment money or this research grant money is used by Harvard to pay the bills and keep the lights on instead of fund critical research. And now it's not that this money would go to trade schools. I don't care about that. What it is what's being lost by not having this money there. That research that it was funding would stop. Here's how Harvard's president put it in an interview on NPR yesterday morning.
I would say that the federal government has the authority through the budgeting process to reallocate funds. But the question to ask is, what problem is he trying to solve by doing that? The money that goes to research universities in the form of grants and contracts, which is almost all of the federal support that we get, is used to pay for work that we perform at the behest of the government. So in reallocating to some other use, including trade schools, it means that work just won't be performed. So the right question is this the most effective use of federal funding? Do you really want to cut back on research dollars?
And he asks a really good question there, which is, what is Trump's goal? And I want you to keep that in mind as I talk more about this and hang on to it for the end, because it isn't, like I said, whether the money is going to a different school, but what's being lost by not having it. But that isn't a question the administration seems to be concerned with, because this week, Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced the U.S. would be pausing all foreign student visas, no matter the university, after imposing what's called a social media screening on all of these visas, though it's really unclear what that means. If it's the ideological screening that Trump was talking about on the campaign trail, whether they're looking for legitimate hate speech, or whether they're going to be asking people about a watermelon emoji in their profiles. But let's get back to foreign students here. Foreign students and the visas they're on account for about 5% of the overall undergraduate student body and about 12% of the graduate level students, so people getting things beyond their bachelor's degree. And generally, they aren't taking the place of U.S.-born students in those programs, because a lot of colleges and these programs give their first spots to U.S.-born students and then fill the ones they can't with non-U.S. students. But Not having these students in these spots because their visas are being denied or paused will cause a lot of damage. Pausing those visas mean that the U.S. will lose out on not just the research these kids are often brought in to do, but also what the students themselves, year after year, give back to the U.S. The Association of International Educators, which advocates for international students, found that last school year, students on foreign visas contributed nearly $44 billion to the U.S. economy and helped support more than 370,000 jobs just by being here. Now, some of that was based off their tuitions, which is frequently much higher than it is compared to the U.S.-born classmates. Some of that is the money they spend here because many of them support themselves while they're going to school in the U.S., and a lot of that is based on the jobs that they hold while they're here, on top of the jobs the research they do creates downstream. By denying student visas, the administration will likely also be furthering a problem the U.S. has seen for years now, which is that many international students are leaving the U.S. after graduating. The Nonpartisan Economic Innovation Group found that in 2021, 60% of all foreign-born students who graduated with a bachelor's degree or higher left the country within a decade. That number went down the more educated a person got, likely because it just takes a longer time to get a master's or a PhD, which means more time to build a community or put roots down here in the U.S. And often that is the exact claim against giving foreign students visas, that they come to get a world-class education in America and then go back home when they're done, and the U.S. loses out on the return on investment in that person. Now, leave the grossness of talking about education as an ROI spreadsheet aside. Most foreign students want to stay in the U.S., they just can't because the U.S. immigration system is broken. And that's because of something called H-1B visas. And very quickly, H-1B visas are given to people who are in the U.S., who want to work, who are not in agricultural industries. They are often specialized jobs that require some higher level of education. And the U.S. caps the number of H-1B visas it gives out every year to about 65,000, with an extra 20,000 for people who have advanced degrees. It's been that way for 20 years under Democratic and Republican presidents alike. But what this report about students leaving found is that most students do want to stay in the U.S., but the country is reaching that visa cap so quickly, those students can't. And as the researchers who put this report together said, a growing population of international students is competing for a fixed number of opportunities to stay. And as a result, more graduates are simply leaving. With an estimated 1.1 million students leaving between 2012 and 2020, and we're losing, that means somewhere in the neighborhood of 150,000 students every year. So it's not students bilking the U.S. for a degree and then thumbing their noses at America as they get on a plane to go home. It's the U.S. hamstringing itself and losing these jobs, which are often in industries like medicine or tech or energy that require specialized skills and degrees that a lot of U.S. graduates don't have. And I know the next thing here is that, well, doesn't that mean that American workers can get those jobs? It turns out that H-1B visa holders really aren't taking American jobs either, just like they're not really taking the places of American students. By law, employers have to clear their visa applications with the Department of Labor, so the U.S. government, and prove that by hiring this person that would get this visa, they're not going to harm the wages or work environment of other workers. And out of the total amount of jobs in the U.S., which last year was about 162 million jobs, 85,000 H-1B visas accounts for 0.5% of the overall total, so not even a drop in the bucket in the economy. On top of that, the American Immigration Council, a nonpartisan immigration group, found that during Trump's first administration, more than a third of new or renewing H-1B visa applications were denied, which is a lot of people. And that number fell to historic lows under Biden, but it's expected to ramp back up under Trump 2.0, which experts say will cause the U.S. to fall further behind when it comes to retaining high-knowledge workers. So, if international students aren't taking the place of U.S. students, they're not taking jobs after college, they're adding billions to the economy while they're here and working in high-powered research that can help produce breakthroughs on American soil, why target them and by extension the universities they attend? The administration says it's about anti-Semitism, but keeps moving the goalposts and also, for what it's worth, looks the other way when making trillion-dollar deals, in their words, with Middle Eastern countries that support anti-Semitic terror. Which brings us back to the question that was asked by Harvard's president, what is the goal? I think the answer to that is to make these universities and these students afraid. And that's not actually me saying that. That's the Department of Homeland Security, which said in its letter to Harvard, revoking its student visas, consequences must follow to send a clear signal to Harvard and all universities that the Trump administration will enforce the law and root out the evils of anti-Americanism and anti-Semitism in society and campuses. So, punishing Harvard is a threat. It's a threat to institutions, not just universities, because Homeland Security said it's also aiming for broader society as well. And what cannot be lost in all of this is that in the middle of it are thousands of students who just came to the U.S. to learn, to make friends, and to have a shot at a better life. And I want to leave you with what economist Justin Wolfers said this week about being a former Harvard foreign visa student watching this happen, because I think he said it the best I've heard so far.
I got my PhD at Harvard. I was an international student at Harvard. I was a young Aussie kid who did well at school and worked hard and had my shot. So I'm actually I'm going to put aside we'll come back to the economist answer, but I want to give you a personal one because I was there. And I don't understand making these kids a pawn in some ideological game. They're bright kids from all around the world who are just trying to get ahead. Look, I know to a certain part of your audience, the fact that I have a Harvard PhD makes me a wanker. Mate, it is what it is. I probably am. But I was just a kid who wanted a shot. And I can't imagine the fear of waking up, having finally figured out how to go to the greatest economics department in the world, to learn how to become an economist from the finest craftsman and take that knowledge to other countries, which I'm doing right now, and just have it taken. It's cruel.
Okay, that is it for today's episode. Please rate and review the show on whatever podcast app you're listening to this on. Like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications on YouTube so you don't miss out on any new episodes there. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack. It is just $5 a month for paid subscribers, and it really helps support the show. And if you don't want to do that because like $5 in this economy, I get it. But instead, please share the show on social media. It's MIMS News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am at Granthermes on X and Bluesky, and at Granthermes TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Granthermes, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.